and it was intended. It was United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, and it was done 20 years ago in order to say that the world community needed to come together to deal with world environmental issues. This Building a Zoo talks about, this radio show talks about the David Quammen book about island biogeography in the time of extinctions. Well, it's this breaking up of the world's habitat by human habitation and development that is causing a collapse of the natural web of life that's happening around us. And we see the evidence of it if we just pause and look at it and take the agenda of, oh, wait, you're going to be bad for business. Well, bad for business. The environmental protection and business sustainable development can coexist. We just have to be sensitive about the needs of each. And that's what that conference was about. And as a matter of fact, the preamble to Agenda 21, which there's a lot of people out there who think that this is some kind of conspiracy, but we're going to get to that in these last few minutes. The preamble to Agenda 21 says, humanity stands at a defining moment in history. We are confronted with the perpetuation of disparities between and within nations, a worsening of poverty, hunger, ill health and illiteracy, and the continuing deterioration of the ecosystems on which we depend for our well-being. However, integration of environment and development concerns and greater attention to them will lead to the fulfillment of basic needs, improved living standards for all, better protected and managed ecosystems, and safer, more prosperous future. No nation can achieve this on its own, but together we can in a global partnership for sustainable development. Well, where does the UN come off having such a conference on environmental development? What kind of conspiracy is that? Well, let's go back and read a little bit about the United Nations. The Charter of the United Nations is this. I'm reading from the United Nations, The World's Last Chance for Peace by Winthrop and Francis Nielsen. It was published back in the early 1970s, and so some of the issues that were at hand back then have evolved and matured. But the Charter of the United Nations, and that's where the commentary is, but this is an appendix, and so this comes directly from the Charter of the United Nations. The preamble says, "We, the peoples of the United Nations, determined to save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, which twice in our lifetime has brought untold sorrow to mankind, and to reaffirm our faith in fundamental human rights, in the dignity and worth of the human person, in the equal rights of men and women and of nations large and small, and to establish conditions under which justice and respect for the obligations arising from treaties and other sources of international law can be maintained, and to promote social progress and better understand standards of life in larger freedom, and for these ends to practice tolerance and to live together in peace with one another as good neighbors, and to unite our strength to maintain international peace and security, and to ensure by the acceptance of principles and the institution of methods that armed force shall not be used save in the common interest, and to employ international machinery for the promotion of the economic and social advancement of all peoples, have resolved to combine our efforts to accomplish these aims. Accordingly, our respective governments, through representatives assembled in the city of San Francisco, who have exhibited their full powers, found to be in good and due form, have agreed to the present Charter of the United Nations, and do hereby establish an international organization to be known as the United Nations. The purposes of the United Nations are, 1. To maintain international peace and security, and to that end to take effective collective measures for the prevention and removal of threats to the peace, and for the suppression of acts of aggression or other breaches of the peace, and to bring about by peaceful means and in conformity with the principles of justice and international law, adjustment or settlement of international disputes or situations which might lead to breach of the peace. 2. To develop friendly relations among nations based on respect for the principles of equal rights and self-determination of peoples. and to take other appropriate measures to strengthen universal peace. 3, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for the fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion. And 4, to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. The principles are, the organization is based on the principle of the sovereign equality of all its members. 2, all members, in order to ensure to all of them the rights and benefits resulting from membership, shall fulfill in good faith the obligations assumed by them in accordance with the present charter. 3, all members shall settle their international disputes by peaceful means in such a manner that international peace and security and justice are not endangered. 4, all members shall refrain in their international relations from the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state or in any other manner inconsistent with the purposes of the United Nations. 5, all members shall give the United Nations every assistance in any action it takes in accordance with the present charter, and shall refrain from giving assistance to any state against which the United Nations is taking preventative or enforcement action. 6, the organization shall ensure that states which are not members of the United Nations act in accordance with these principles so far as may be necessary for the maintenance of international peace and security. And 7, nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state, or shall require the members to submit such matters to settlement under the present charter. But this principle shall not prejudice the application of other enforcement measures within. So I've got 2 minutes, and let me say that nations, with their individual decision making, we know that the nation is not the be-all and end-all. We know that we pledge allegiance to one nation under God, that there's higher authority than the nation. We have, as an international concept, this notion that just because your government demands you to do something doesn't mean that you have to do it. As a matter of fact, you can be a war criminal for doing it. The Nuremberg trials made very clear that there is a standard higher than one nation's particular choice. But this charter of the UN goes to recognize the sovereignty of nations. It has a General Assembly, and it has a Security Council, and so nobody can do anything in the UN unless the Security Council, unless it goes through this whole procedural process, and then a state can still say, no, I'm not going to do it. Well, the United States has said, no, I'm not going to do it, and it used to be right after World War II that everybody was on the same side as the United States, and so everything passed, and the Russians were the ones that were pounding and not adhering to the charter of the UN. And now the United States is finding itself not following the charter of the UN. And so some people say, well, get rid of the UN. No, I say we're a world. It's one world, and it's not one world government, but it's one world concepts. And they're dealing with economic and development consequences of the degradation of our environment, of this planet Earth, and they're dealing with it right now down in Rio. They dealt with it 20 years ago, and the Agenda 21 came out of it. Act locally, think globally. Act locally, think globally.